the team at Intelligence Squared who helped put this debate together, we're chatting about with the midterm elections coming up. We were curious to know, we're not in an election right now where national security is what everybody's talking about in terms of the midterms. But if they were, what should Americans be thinking about in terms of national security this election? What's at stake? Kori Schake, I'll go to you first.
I think Americans should be worried about the size of the national debt. And as a national security issue, we will crowd out discretionary spending, which is everything the government does besides retirement and medical care, unless we actually stop spending money we don't have. We are engaged in intergenerational theft against our grandchildren, and we ought to stop doing it.
And you put that under the category of national security. Okay. John Mearsheimer, how about you?
I think the principal problem in the United States is that we have a highly militarized foreign policy, that we're running all over the world, interfering in other countries' business, fighting wars that we lose, and creating all sorts of problems for civil liberties at home, and furthermore, spending huge amounts of money in the process. And it would be really nice if we got some political leaders who were in favor of a more restrained and sane foreign policy.
John, why do you think that's not aggressively robustly part of the conversation now politically?
I think if you look at the public and what the public thinks, there's a lot of support for what I said. It's why Barack Obama got elected. It's why Donald Trump got elected. But the elites in this country who form the foreign policy establishment are deeply committed to running the world. They believe we are the indispensable nation. We stand taller, we see further, and no evidence to the contrary can convince them otherwise.
Stephen Cohen.
I work and think as a historian, and therefore I'm rather specific. We're back to the midterm election, correct?
Yeah.
I didn't vote for Trump. Don't really care what becomes of him. But I fear the beginning of a Democratic-controlled House impeachment process for the sake of our national security, and here's why. We have a new Cold War that's fraught with new Cuban Missile-type crises. What we learned from President Kennedy in 1962 is that to avoid nuclear war in such a crisis, we have to trust our president fully. Trump can't have a phone call with Putin today without John Brennan, the former director of the CIA, yelling that it's treason, and 3 New York Times columnists echoing it. So if there's a new Cuban Missile Crisis type situation, we almost had one last week in Syria, maybe it's going to be that, or in Ukraine, or, add it up, in the North Baltics, where NATO's building up. And suddenly we're at this moment. And we have to trust Trump, as we have every president since Eisenhower, to avoid nuclear war with Moscow. He can't do it. This Russiagate thing, which I do not believe, by the way, has crippled him. And I'm afraid that if the Democrats take the House, that they will go all out on this impeachment. And if there's a Cuban type of crisis, we will be in such grave danger, not because of Trump, but because he won't be free to do what every president since Eisenhower has done.
How about you, Roel?
In theory, I agree with Kori. I think the national debt is going to eat everything. But I also am quite pessimistic because the only way you can really get a handle on that is cut back on entitlement programs, and I don't think we have the political will to do that. So I'm at a loss, I have to confess, on how we handle that issue. You're not going to tax your way out of the $21 trillion debt. You're going to have to cut your way out of it. I just don't think it's happening.
Full force is out of NATO.
Yeah, that's peanuts. The military is just peanuts compared to domestic spending. I would actually have to add, I think it's delusional to believe that dictatorships are not vibrant, that we're at the end of the history and liberal democracy is safe. I think dictatorships can come back with a vengeance. History is radical and it is violent. And the United States has to be prepared to fight abroad. It is the only way that you are going to keep the peace. You are sometimes going to get involved in wars that may be distasteful, frustrating, and all the rest. That is part of the process. I don't know whether the Americans want to, bear that burden, but I would suggest that it's the burden we should want to bear. The world is a better place. It is a safer place. However, it does cost money. It doesn't cost as much money as John would want us to believe.
Thanks, Ruel. And Derek Chalet.
Well, I think when you do foreign policy as a profession, you spend most of your waking hours worrying. And I agree with all the worries that my colleagues have expressed. But let me pick up something, Stephen, that you said, which I think regardless of the outcome of the midterm election, and I hate to end the night on such pessimism, we're still in a world of trouble. Because one of two outcomes is going to happen. Either the Republicans will hold the House and the Senate, and President Trump's going to feel bulletproof. He's going to feel like he can do nothing wrong. And if the Democrats win, I think whether it's impeachment or just simple oversight of the administration through investigations and turning over the rocks of corruption that are clearly there, we're going to have an extended domestic crisis in this country, politically. And that's going to be preoccupying for all of us. And this links to Stephen's point on the Cuban Missile Crisis. It seems preposterous to say this, but if you think back over the last several years, the U.S. actually has not had a crisis. I mean, Corey was in the Bush administration during 9/11. I was in the Obama administration during the Arab Spring or Arab Revolt in Ukraine, when it felt like our inboxes were overflowing and events were spinning out of control. We actually have not had that sort of global event yet, but it's coming. And how is this administration going to handle it?